All right, everybody, hello and welcome to another Top Advisor Marketing Podcast. I am your host, Matt Halloran. Now, if you don't know who this is, I don't know where you have been hiding, especially here at the Carson event, which is where we are. It'd be great if the camera could flip around so you could see everything here. But we are actually in the vendor hall here in front of a lot of people eating, which is fantastic. But I've got Larry Sprung here again, the founder of Mitlin Financial, and even more importantly, the 200th episode producing financial advisor for the Mitlin Money Mindset. Welcome, brother.
Hey, thanks for having me, Matt. Pleasure to be here.
Listen, one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we talked about today really was, why did you want to start a podcast? Because I think there's a lot of people here who don't really understand why an advisor would take that step.
Yeah, so I think that there are really a couple of reasons. One is, selfishly, I enjoy it. I enjoy talking to people. And, what better way to speak with people that ordinarily would not speak with me, but you tell them you have a podcast and all of a sudden they're interested, right? So I think that that's, one very important factor. Two is, from a standpoint of the business funnel, right? People need to be reached the way they want to be reached. And not everybody's going to be happy or interested in a newsletter. Not everybody's going to want to read a blog. Not everybody's going to want to see a video. So it just adds one more tool to the arsenal to hopefully bring people into the funnel and know who you are and follow you.
Well, we talk a lot about how marketing is fundamentally changed. You have to market to your ideal client and prospect in the media they prefer with organic content while they're there. And so I'm glad that you listed all of those things, because you're right. There are some people who are going to love to read, right? There's other people, and you do a lot of video, right? And there's going to be a lot of people who want to watch podcasts. So one of the questions that I get asked a lot of times from advisors is, you run a very successful shop, okay? They can look you up. You don't need to share the numbers if you don't want. You've got a team, right? You record every week. Like, you do one show a week. Mm-hmm. How do you do that and still run a successful financial services practice?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's, you have to have that team in place, and you want to make it as easy and frictionless as possible. So really, the only thing that I am involved with directly with regard to the show is creating the introduction, the thank you, and recording the episode. Beyond that, everything else is being handled by some other part or member of my team. And that's what really makes it seamless and easy, because I'm not good at a lot of the details of that, and I don't want to be. I really want to just hop in, have a conversation, an engaging one, and be able to take care of all the rest. And that's really from the setup, booking the guests, creating the questions, recording the show, and then from there, it's pretty much turned over to your team to kind of button it up, edit it, and then put it out into the world in a way that is going to garner more eyeballs than if we did it ourselves.
Now, okay, well, so let's break the time down, right? So you just listed all of the things. How much time is it off your calendar per month to execute this?
Yeah, so I don't know if I can calculate it per month. I could give you per show, right? Because I think that's a little bit easier, because there are times where I basically, on my calendar, I've blocked out Mondays and Fridays to do recordings. And I will do no more than 2 each of those days. So sometimes I'll have none. Like this week, being here at Excell, I'm pretty much not recording any new episodes. I walk into the office this coming Monday, I have 2 episodes, and then I believe I have 2 the following Friday. So for me, time-wise, it's about an hour to record the show, and then probably about a half hour in prep and creating the introduction and the thank you to the guest at the end. So I would say about an hour and a half each episode. So if you figure we're doing 52 episodes a year, you could do the math pretty easily.
So we had asked that question all the time about, because one of the costs that you have to pay attention to as a business owner is time.
Sure.
Right? And so we say it's 3 to 4 hours per month for 2 episodes, right? Which, that's exactly the same thing. You want to prep, you want to practice, intro, outro. You have a team that helps with the reviews. A lot of the independent advisors, they do their own review from a compliance standpoint or submission. So I also want to say, though, that one of the reasons why your show's so good is because of the fact that you're prepping and you know it's a show. Could you talk a little bit about, because I know you're also a semi-professional hockey player. So when it comes to prep and it comes to getting ready for the show, what are some of the things that you do to make it so that, because you know it's a show, that you put in and show up?
Listen, it has to be good. If we're going to put the content out, it's got to be good. We've had this conversation before. The thing that drives me nuts is if I turn on a show and the audio sucks, I'm turning it off and I'm never listening again. So the audio has to be good for me to continue to listen. But in terms of prep, I want to know who they are. I want to know what they're about. I read their bio. I check out their LinkedIn. I check out their website. I read the intro that we've created and I read over their bio and kind of get to know them before. And then I look at the questions. And sometimes as I'm doing that final prep before the show, I look at the questions and I'm like, you know what? This isn't really going to flow well, and I'll reorganize the questions a little bit to get the flow better. Now, we provide people with questions, not because they ask for it or not because we need to. I just feel there are some people that want to see those questions. Some people don't want to necessarily need them. We just provide it as a framework. So if they're nervous about not knowing it, they know it. They know what we're going to basically talk about. And then we just make sure it flows. And sometimes in the midst of the conversation and all, during the show, to make it good or great, you have to be flexible enough because you may be talking about something. You may have already covered one of those questions, or it may make sense for you to jump from what you thought was number 2 to number 7. And you have to do that on the fly and be willing to do that and not be so rigid, because then it becomes just so prescriptive and it's not really a show and it's not entertaining.
Do you think that you naturally have that skill, or is that something you've honed over the 200 episodes?
So I would say it's a combination of both, right? I think that, certainly listening to episode 1 versus, and the perfect example is I had Ron Carson as my first guest ever, and he was my 100th guest. And I apologized to him in the intro of episode 100 saying how poorly a job I did in episode 1 because I did get better. And I think, and I think this might be where you're going, if you want to practice in this medium, it's not something you could just do and put out there. You want to get better. And, whether you like him or not, I grew up listening to Howard Stern a lot, probably arguably one of the best interviewers out there. And I learned a lot from how he asked questions and how he interacted with guests. David Letterman, you watch his show, I forget the name of the show, but on Netflix where, My Next Guest or something like that. You listen to some of these people who who are really good at interviewing people and get them to talk about things that, maybe they weren't intending on talking about.
Yeah. Well, I have 4 interview heroes. So Oprah Winfrey, because she could make the world melt away.
Yeah.
When you lock eyes with Oprah, there's nothing else there. Phil Donahue, who recently passed away,
right?
Because I thought he was brilliant in how he used silence, which was remarkable. Terry Gross, who runs a program called Fresh Air. She's done over 10,000 interviews. And then, oh my God, Larry King.
Yeah.
So my favorite's Larry King story, because you're talking about prep, right? So my favorite Larry King story, did you hear that Jerry Seinfeld got really mad at him?
No.
Because he was asking questions, Larry was asking questions to Jerry as if he didn't know anything really about Jerry, because there are a lot of people who had no idea who Jerry Seinfeld was or what Seinfeld was. And Seinfeld goes, have you even watched one of my shows? Right? And Larry was like, well, of course, but I'm asking the questions. So one of the things I like about him, and I think you do this really well on the show too, which allows you to have that pivot and that flow, is you go in like with the eyes of a child. You genuinely have wonder, or like what they talk about here, wow, right? In interviewing your guest. And again, do you think that's something that you've curated over time, or is that just part of who Larry is?
So I think that when we first started out, my first question has started to become, tell us about your journey up into the point of what you're doing now. And I don't think we asked that at the beginning, but I started realizing as I did this, the thing that fascinated me the most in many of these conversations was that entrepreneurial journey and how different it is. But at the same time, it's also very similar. There's a lot of similar threads between one guest to another, and hearing how they either overcame or went through whatever challenges or battles they had is interesting to me. So that's where we start out with everybody, and then we tell them, hey, we're going to spend time on where you are today, but what started all this? And I think it's important. And I think, to Larry King's point, the interview may not have been for Larry King. It was for all those people that didn't know, that maybe now get introduced to Jerry Seinfeld and now are a fan as a result of that interview. And I think that's an important piece.
Yeah. Well, there's an ulterior motive to this line of questioning for you, because I think what a lot of advisors and people don't understand who are trying to get their expertise out in the marketplace is you have to have you. The essence come out in your show, right? And I think a lot of people are really concerned that they're not likable enough, or that they don't want to be real, right? We call it being your own loud at ProudMouth. And you really, that's your whole existence, right? Everything on social media, it's you, right? And this is the persona that you've put out there. How was that curated? So I know that your wife really helps a lot with all of that stuff. She's an unbelievable human being. But how did you give yourself permission to be you?
Yeah, so I think that dates back to like 2018, 2019. And I was of the ilk that, Denise, who's our director of marketing, now also my wife, was saying to me that, you got to put yourself out there more. People want to know more about you. And I was like, people don't want to know I'm out to dinner at this location. They don't want to know I'm at vacation here. And she's like, oh, they do. So we tried an experiment in 2019. We went on a family vacation to South Africa, and we went on safari. And we documented the whole trip on social media. And I got an email from a client of ours who had COPD, never able to leave the house really. And one of her lifelong dreams was to go on safari at South Africa. And she started emailing me every day. And she was like, thank you for sharing this. I really appreciate it. I feel like I went on safari with you and your family, and I feel like I've hit my lifelong dream of having this experience. And it was in that moment that I did what every husband should do a lot, and that is apologize to my wife for being right. And from that point on, we've really leaned into that, and it's paid off in spades. We had one family tell us just a few weeks ago that they're not on Facebook anymore, but they log in 2 to 3 times a week just to see what's going on with me. Like, they want to get the update. So it's really important that you do that, and I think leaning into it has been a huge help for us.
People love you. They do business with your firm really because you're the face of the firm. And that's how most financial services professionals grow their business. Is it's not because of their asset allocation or their performance or their systems or their financial planning process. The real connection is with them as a human being. And I love that you said that, who's going to want to pay attention to that? And the answer is everybody, right? Especially with how the world has moved today, with a substantial amount of transparency that you need to have in your professional life. It works really well. Okay, so we're gonna talk about a couple other logistic-y things here too. Okay, because you, unlike the majority of people who are in this room, actually spend money on marketing, right? How did you make that decision? Because the new Kitces report just said that the average advisor only spends 1% on marketing, and they're wondering why they're not growing.
I think it's important listen, any business you look at their P&L, they have a marketing budget, and I think in our profession, it's almost like, well, people know me, they know what I do, so, they should come talk to me. And, that might work. It may not work as often, but I think if you spend the money on marketing, now it may not pay dividends today at all. We just brought on a family, a single woman who's followed me for about 10 years. 10 years. Followed our stuff on social, known who I am. And I think because of the marketing we did, we stayed top of mind. We were there. And then she had an event where she left her employer and she said, I got to move my money out of there. And then 2 weeks later, it was my mom selling her house and she needs to do something with that cash. And then just yesterday, we got a call from somebody who said, so-and-so just asked me to call you because she's working with you, and I haven't had any money, but I do now. And she said, so you have to meet people where they are, and you have to, put money behind those things that are going to put you out there, top of mind. So when they're ready and they're in need, it's not a sale. It's just your marketing. We're not talking about sales. We're talking about marketing, putting yourself out there so that when that need arises, you're top of mind and they're coming to you.
Well, the number one reason, and the other reason why I think your firm has been and that's such a great example of that, is because the number one reason why a client would leave their advisor is what? Do you know?
Oh, probably not hearing from
That's
them.
correct. It's client communication. Yeah. And so you have put substantial money towards this ever-present and omnipresent level of client communication, which increases your referrals because it's easier. So, Bill Cates?
Yeah,
okay.
Sure.
So Bill Cates is the referral coach. When my partner and I brought ProudMouth to him, he was like, Matt, it's probably a lot easier to refer somebody to a podcast than it is call my guy.
100%.
Because nobody calls their guy anymore, right? And if they say, hey, you should work with Larry, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look to see who the hell Larry is. And if you don't have that social proof and you don't exist, and you're not going to get that business. But you also said something that's really important there, which is how do you track this on the back end, right? Because you are a business owner, right? You're a financial planner and you're a planner at heart because I actually know you as a human, right? So you want to make sure that if this is happening, these other things are happening. How are you tracking any sort of ROI or success with marketing?
Yeah, so I would say this first and foremost. ROI is not necessarily, especially when it comes to the podcast, from dollars and cents perspective, is not important to me. Because the ROI for me is having those conversations with people that I ordinarily wouldn't have been able to talk to. ROI for me is having that additional avenue of social proof. And I think more importantly, which we haven't talked about, we now have a curated library of people to go to. So when we have a family that has an estate planning need that they don't understand what a revocable or irrevocable trust is or are, and I've told them till I'm blue in the face and they're still not understanding it, it's just fine. We pull out an episode where we had an estate planning attorney that went over it and share it. Or we had somebody that was in need of private heir, so we shared a private heir person that we had on the show. So it's a curated library. So that is my return on investment. I mean, we certainly do track some of the things, but I will tell you, with all these different avenues and touch points that we have, social media, podcast, book, website, blog, Joy Journal, all these different, it's hard to tell because, you legitimately ask somebody how they found out about you. And they're like, well, I don't know. I went on Google, and they can't tell you that definitive path. So there's not one thing. We just had a family that came to us recently, and we asked them how they found out about us. The husband said, I don't know. My wife told me to call you. And then we finally had a meeting with both of them, and we asked the wife, and we said, just how did you find out about us? And she said, I legitimately don't remember. All I know is I put a note in my phone that the financial advisor I need to call is Lawrence Sprung. And we Googled you, looked you up. She goes, I can't recall who gave it to me. I just put it in the phone.
Well, in Proudmouthian language, we call it moving people from skeptics to fans, right? And when you have this data set, all of this information, all of these resources for your clients, you're going to move not only just your clients, but also prospects. And I love the 10-year story, right? She was following you for 10 years. One of the advisors that we worked with brought an estate planning attorney on, and I know you've done this multiple times, and they were talking about trusts. And the woman, the estate planning attorney said, I have a whole desk drawer full of unsigned things, but I've been paid on them because I did the work. And our advisor said, well, what should happen? And she's like, well, they should probably fund the trusts and call you. And so this guy had done an estate planning workshop many, many moons ago, which I know you have done some educational events. And so it was 5 years ago that he did this estate planning workshop. This woman calls him up and says, I've been following you for 5 years, right? And from a sales perspective, that's a terrible sales cycle. Right? 5 freaking years? Are you kidding me? Oh my God. But listen, she had a lot of money, and she was pre-sold. And that's one of the things that I've heard from you and Denise, right? When people come in through your pipeline, they might not remember how they heard about you, but they freaking know you. They already know who you are, what you do. They like, know, and trust you because you're putting yourself out there so much. So we don't have an enormous amount of time left. when it comes to what you see working more in the future. So you're going to put on Carnac. You remember Jimmy Carson with Carnac, right? Yeah, I'm going to have you project into the future as a successful marketing financial services professional. What do you think's next?
Listen, I think podcasting is in very, very early stages, right? I think it's very early on. And I think just leaning into that, making that more successful is just going to be helpful to us. And, we have a pretty good strategy between, social, podcast, blog, website, all these things. I don't know what the next is going to be. For me, I'm looking at going into some more long form video. We have a lot of short form content. Long form through the podcast, looking to do more video content and leading into our theme of joy, because I think that resonates with a lot of people. And that's like the next for us. But listen, the technology is going so quickly, so fast. I don't know what the next is. I'm relying on Carson to hopefully give me some indication about what's going on there, because that's where they're spending a lot of their time thinking.
Well, we know that, and you are living proof of this, that you create the long form content and then we chunk that for you into lots of little pieces of content. And your short form content, especially your YouTube shorts, are doing very, very well for you. And so leaning more into the video, YouTube, by the way, just so everybody knows, is the number 2 podcast player in the world. It actually beats Apple, like hands down, pretty aggressively. And so I'm really glad that you're staying flexible. I think that the joy thing is going to be a lot of fun. And I think that's going to probably bring in even more business, because that's a heart thing for you. So do you mind? We do have a few people here. If anybody has any questions, there's a really handsome guy right there with a microphone. If anybody wants to ask Larry any questions, or me about what we do for him, or podcasting, or really social media, we're more than happy to answer any of those questions. If not, whatever, I'll just keep going. But I just figured I'd offer it up. Okay, so we do. All right.
Hey there.
Hey.
So if you've never done a podcast or anything of that nature,
Put your mic closer.
what's that? Oh, closer?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah. If you've never done a podcast, or if you never have gotten into that, how do you get started? Like, what's the first step in that process look like?
How did you get started?
Yeah, so in full disclosure, I didn't know Matt when I started. We met like almost immediately thereafter. So I had somebody that walked me through the process in terms of equipment, the structure of the show. Originally, the show was going to be me talking, and I started recording the first episode, and like 5 minutes in, I'm like, I can't do this. There's no way I'm doing this every week. I need a guest. So it shifted. But there's a lot of tools out there. Had I known Matt at the time, they have the PodRocket Academy, which basically answers that question, walks you and your team through the whole process of start to production. And I think the biggest takeaway that I had from the people I work with, and I know that Matt subscribes to the same, is you don't want to just have one show recorded and launch it. You want to have like 6 to 12 in the can ready to go, so that you're not under the pressure of recording. But there's a lot of great tools out there. PodRocket Academy, I highly recommend. And then there's also other, free resources that are available if you want to get started with that.
Well, and I also think it's important, just to piggyback off of that you are prepared, right? So before you ever hit record for episode 1, you need to know what episode 6 is going to be. Right. And we've got an entire system that really helps with that. In fact, I've done podcasts upon podcasts about that. And it's really, really important, because it increases your confidence. Right. So and also gives you continuity. Right. Like, hey, today I'm going to be talking about this. And just so you know, I'm going to dive into that more deeply later down the road in future episodes, which is another good tactic.
Yeah, and to Matt's point, he and I were talking about this yesterday. I have episodes now recorded that'll go through January, and we're in September now. Me personally, I don't like being under the gun. I want to have the ability that if I want to or need to take a month off, I don't have to record, because it could become a grind if you're doing a lot of them in a short period of time, and the voice doesn't hold out sometimes.
All right.
Yeah, for your content library, and if you had multiple shows, like an interview show or a radio show and different types, would you put it all on one feed or one YouTube channel, or would you split it out between 5 different channels and 5 different feeds?
Well, I'll default to I'm not a marketing expert. Yeah. I'm just the host.
Yeah.
I like talking to people, so I'll defer to Matt. If my wife was here, I'd let her answer that question, because
Yeah, where is Denise? Anyway, there she is. We believe that you need to take it and put it everywhere, right? So you are on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. You're on Instagram,
Yes.
right? Are you on Instagram yet?
I am on it.
Okay, you are on Instagram.
Yeah.
And then, so YouTube, he has a channel. Every podcast, every video is on the main channel. Then he's got the YouTube Shorts channel, right? So all of the YouTube Shorts are there, which, by the way, get about 10 to 20 times the views than long videos. And so YouTube Shorts, it's an absolute must. But all of this stuff is published in the right aspect ratio and in the right format per each social media channel. Because you can't do the same thing on Instagram than you can do on LinkedIn because it doesn't look right and it actually doesn't please the algorithm, right? Pleasing the algorithm is a very important thing. But one of the things I think people really forget is it's called the World Wide Web, right? Forgot that, right? So you have to have links, backlinks everywhere, all over the place to create your own personal web. And with his content library, his book, his TV appearances, all of the things that they've done all point back to the Mitlin Financial webpage, right? Which is one of the reasons why they get the level of traffic that they do, because it all is in concert, right? It can't be disparate. You can't just do, FMT. You can't just have an FMT solutions webinar or seminar and think that that's all you can do, because that's got to lead you to idea kit or videos that we do or our content marketing. It's all got to work together. A lot of you think that there's a one-stop solution, and it's just not there.
And I would just add one other thing. Remember, you're going to have links out to your guests, them personally, their LinkedIn and their companies. That also adds credibility to you and your brand that, whether you know them or you just know them for an hour, people who see it think that you know them, and that also adds credibility back to your website as well, and wherever you're originally.
Well, it's a freaking testimonial, right? Let's just so you bring on the most famous estate planning attorney in Long Island, right?
No.
Why would they come on your show if they didn't think Larry Sprung was the greatest thing in the world, right? Oh my God, right? And you use our system now, which you didn't at the beginning, but when a guest comes on our shows, right, we have a whole system that you are not allowed to be on Mitlin Financial, Mitlin Money Mindset, unless you agree to share that podcast with your whole network. So now Larry just got access to the #1 estate planning attorney in Long Island's whole network, because it's a 30-minute commercial about how great that estate planning attorney is, right? And this is how these are concentric circles of influence.
And we just had the founder of recently, the founder of Liquivita. I don't know if you're aware of who they are on the podcast, but it's irrelevant. What they did was they made us a co-creator, or joined us as a co-creator on Instagram, and immediately his thousands upon thousands of followers saw him on our show, and then we picked up a lot of followers as a result of that, and now we're being offered to go on his show live in studio for that. So that's a big help too.
So everything needs to work together. Everything can work together. If there are any other questions, you guys can answer the question. You have a question? Oh my God, I can't hear you. Oh, there we go.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. All right. Larry, I'm sure on your first episode you were, uncomfortable. When did you get comfortable? At what point in your podcast?
I don't know that I'm still comfortable. I think, I think to some degree having a little bit of uncomfortability is actually a good thing, right? Because and I think I say that from a standpoint of, yes, we've had 200 episodes recorded, so there's a comfortability in the process. There's a comfortability, but you never know. You're getting on a recording with a live human being who really could say anything. You don't know how it's going to react. We've had guests on that are open about, for instance, we have one guest that's coming to mind. Her mom died by suicide, which is something very important to me. And having a question about that, it's not really taped and it's edited, but you don't really want it edited. The raw emotions there, you don't know how it's going to go over or how they're going to react. So I think to some degree, in my opinion, I don't ever want to be 100% comfortable, because then I think it's more robotic. I think having a little bit of uncomfortability and sweating a little bit as you're on there is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a good thing.
So, and for me, I've done over 1,000 episodes, and I still get excited before every show. so I don't couch it as being uncomfortable, but there is a nervous energy that I use.
Sure.
Right? I use that. If Matt's going to become the Muppet that I want to be on every single solitary show, I harness that energy because I'm so excited about. And we're the same when it comes to this. We love asking people questions. We love asking people deep, meaningful questions about who they are and what they do. Right? And that's why their show is amazing. Right? There's so much more value there than the Mitlin Money Mindset. Right? The last question, and let's end with that. So ask everybody a question that you ask at the end of the show, right?
Well, I'm showing my shirt, so I had this made last night at the event. So each of our guests, we ask them the last question, which is, what did you do today that brought you joy? And we usually end that with, and put you in the right mindset for success, because many times these are business people that we're speaking to, and the answers, have been anywhere from, I make my bed in the morning because I want to start off with a win, to, kneeling down and praying, to dog walking, to sitting down, coffee, going on. It's kind of amazing the answers that you get. Very thought-provoking.
And please follow them if you don't already follow the Mitlin Money Mindset podcast or Mitlin Financial. Please make sure that if you haven't gotten a chance to get the Joy Journal, highly recommend that you do that. It really just allows you to frame your mind right, because we should be focusing on joy, right? This is a magical gift that we're given every single solitary day. The fact that we're on the grass side of the roots, right, is something that I think we just don't take advantage of that mentally as much as we should. And the joy question is such a brilliant way to end the show because it's predictable. People are going to wait to hear the answer at the end, which is just great content. And with that, we're 1 minute and 35 seconds over. If you guys have any questions, please go ahead. You can talk to Larry or myself, and we'd love to be able to help you. Thanks, guys.